In this session, we'll explore different content formats and their platforms shaping modern media consumption. Let's get started.
Another critical question that we need to ask ourselves in thinking about, communicating is bearing in mind that sources have changed. Today we have multiple sources, and think about you, even as somebody who has access to a smartphone and is on various social media platforms. Every time you post something, you publicly on social media, you act as a sender, you act as a source of information. There are those that we call curators as well. Reporters also no longer going out into the field. Some of them have become passive processors of news and information, and that is how they pass that information out. But in that whole discussion, there's also been very unreliable sources of information. So there are those who will abuse the platforms that exist and use that to misinform people and to communicate inaccurate reports. So it's important that we know what that looks like, so that if we're going to communicate, we are aware of the challenges that come with the fact that you have multiple sources, and some of those sources might actually not be credible sources. Then that leads us to the next aspect, which is content. Today, a lot of debates take place around quality content versus breaking news. The traditional media in itself is no longer the place that we go to for breaking news. We go to it for a lot more of in-depth stories and a lot more investigations, a lot more premium content that you're not likely to find as breaking news, and a lot of that content, as I said earlier, is very difficult to put together. But the biggest challenge in terms of media and communication has been the emergence of fake news, or what you call an information disorder. So there's so much misinformation, and this goes back to the fact that you have various sources or varied sources of information, and some of those sources of information are not necessarily credible sources of information. There's also an abundance of choice for consumers. You choose where you want to, consume the news from, or from what platform you want to receive news and information. Is it from, the traditional media spaces as we've known them? Is it from social media platforms? I, for example, the first thing that I do every morning is I will go onto X or Twitter as we have known it, and that's where I find what the big stories of the day are, and then I will then attend to other, social media platforms, and then, I may go onto the, the legacy media as we have known it. So, and the content that I consume in all these spaces is very different. For X, it's, what are the big stories, what are the highlights, and then I may go into, news sites for a lot more in-depth analysis of some of the big stories of the week or of the day. And a lot of this then has gone also to shape the set of news values that we have known for the longest time. We today have what Hacker 2017 calls an updated set of news values. So exclusivity today is a big news value. If you're the only person or the only platform that is carrying a particular story or has access to a particular story, then that in itself makes it valuable. I think for the longest time, and even from journalism school, we were taught that bad news would sell. So if it's bad news, then it's likely to sell. But that doesn't mean that that's all that we look for today. I think we've also seen instances where good news would sell, and especially in a context where The media has been known mainly for carrying, bad news or negative stories for the most part. Conflict still sells as an important news value. The whole aspect of surprise, if it's something that's novel, that's different, then that is likely to make headlines. But another integral aspect of news values today is the ability to be able to integrate audio visuals into storytelling and graphics into storytelling would make it a lot more easier for audiences to consume that, because they can watch snippets of videos, they can listen, they can interact with a lot of the content as or the news as it is being as it is being shared. And that leads me to something else, that one of the things that we focus today and in discussing anything around news values is the shareability. Can I share this story with somebody else? Where is that function on my platform? Because if I've read something that I think is exciting, then I would like to share it with my friends. I'd like to share it with colleagues. So shareability is a huge news value. And then, of course, the magnitude, the number of people involved in the story. I don't think that has changed over time. I think for the longest time we'd look at the prominence, but today we also look at the magnitude of the people that are involved in the story, and then of course the available resources. So it might be a very good story that you want to tell, but you have very limited resources, and that in itself then would impact how that story is told. And then what channels are we using to communicate? Some understanding of the reach or the circulation figures or the audience share of some of the platforms or the number of followers, for example, on social media spaces, would be important in considering what platform to use. Radio, for example, in Kenya, is one of those platforms that is used by several people. I think right now the percentages are just at about 75, anywhere between 75 to 77%, and TV as at 74%. These two are the main platforms in all regions across the country, except in Northeastern, where interestingly, internet leads as the main platform for news and for news and information, and this data is coming out of the Kenya Media Landscape Guide of 2024. Newspapers are at 7%. So it's important that you then understand what is the platform or what are the different channels that I would like to use to communicate. And guiding that would be, where is my audience and what are they consuming? So radio still remains a cornerstone of media consumption in this country. In Kenya, we have more than 303 licensed radio stations, and out of those, about 290 are actively, broadcasting. Some of them are online. They stream to audiences in the diaspora. Many of them are on the digital space, and it's mainly used for those that are 35 and above. It's the place where they go for news and information. And interestingly, within the Western Bloc or the Western region of the country, that's where you have the highest radio consumption block, which is at about 83%. In Kenya, we have about 346 licensed television stations, and almost half of the households in the country own a television, and much of that viewership happens in urban centers, which is quite interesting. The print numbers have been going down. I think I mentioned that earlier. We in terms of the market share, it's just at about 7% of the people that or rather 7% of the market share goes to print. A huge component to radio, and of course to television, as far as the traditional media or the legacy media platforms are concerned. Now, on the digital space, most Kenyans consume digital media. and you're looking here at social media, you're looking at websites, you're looking at the streaming services or mobile apps or digital publications or some of the online news portals. So all of that would constitute what we are referring to as the digital platforms. That uptake of digital media has been precipitated or fueled by the mobile phone penetration in the country, but most importantly, access to technology and access to internet. So with that, then you have a deeper penetration even in non-urban areas where people have access to to internet and of course to mobile phones. The Communications Authority puts the number of Kenyans who own mobile phones in 2024 as 94% of the population. So that's a huge number, and most people spend 6 hours on average online daily, whether it's on email, whether it's on social media platforms, whether it's for entertainment, whether it's for news and information. That's the magnitude of time that people spend, online on a daily basis, and the amount of time that then they spend on social media platforms is about 143 minutes. That's more than 2 hours of a day on social media platforms. And what are those platforms? Some of the most used ones are WhatsApp. It's one of those spaces that, many people are on. Facebook, a lot of that is also determined by the generation that you want to target. X, there's Instagram, there's TikTok, there's YouTube, there's Telegram, and there are many other, social media platforms that are coming up. And if you're going to use media to communicate, it's important that we understand what that reality is, but perhaps even most importantly, what are the trends in media, in media today. The place of AI in media production, in content generation, in distribution is something that we cannot ignore. The digital divide, there are those that will never be able to see anything on social media because they do not have access to digital platforms. And then there are those for who that is the place that they go to for news and information. There's also the rise of online and citizen journalism. We've talked about that, where you have citizens also being producers of content in as much as they're consuming it. The literacy rates are much higher today. The gender disparities are still in contestation, and all this impact news and information. But again, it's important that we bear in mind that if you're going to communicate, the context is equally important. So there will be some context where the literacy rates are very high. There'll be instances where the literacy rates are low. There'll be contexts where the gender divide or the gender disparities is so wide, and all that has access to, has an impact on how people access information and media. And then, of course, the fact that we have lots and lots of misinformation, but that media still remains one of the trusted spaces. In as much as that trust has been dwindling over time, that media is still, trusted. And in Kenya, television remains one of the most trusted media, followed by radio, TV at 33% and radio at about 32 or 31%.
We've looked at the different kinds of content and the latest trends shaping the media landscape. But how do audiences engage with them? In the next video, we'll examine the impact of media on various audiences. See you there.